Way back in the spring of 1990, 10-year-old me was given a $5 allowance. In search of something to spend my money on, I came upon something fantastic at my local convenience store newsstand. It was then that I started a lifelong obsession with the gold standard of sequential art, the comic book. Now, as an old man, I have decided to open up some old boxes and dig into my comic book collection. I decided it's time for me to review and analyze the illustrations and artists that made me comics crazy. What's good, everybody? It is Chris Crazy House here again for another episode of Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. And we're going to be looking at one of my favorite comics from my classic collection, and that is the Mighty Thor 429 that features the rematch battle between Thor and the Juggernaut. And what else is there to say about this comic book right here? This is one of my favorite books from my childhood. It is action-packed, has basically everything that a young man could want. Lots of action, adventure, lots of fisticuffs, and testosterone all packaged into one comic. And if you notice up in the corner here, as if Thor fighting the Juggernaut could not be good enough, you see they sprinkled a cherry on top for you as well. And that is Ghost Rider also appears in this book. So for those who don't know, this is the second rendition of Ghost Rider, who was actually very popular in the early 90s. I believe his secret identity was Dan Ketch, and he became the new Ghost Rider at this time, and he was all, very heavy metal looking, not just with the flaming skull, but he had spikes and chains and everything else, and a really cool flaming motorcycle. So he was very popular at this time, and he was making a lot of guest appearances in different books. He's a member of the new Fantastic Four. He appears in different books like either Spider-Man. He appears, in books like that new character, Darkhawk, and stuff like that. So Ghost Rider was everywhere at this time, and they made sure they gave him a cameo in the Mighty Thor as well. So we're going to be taking a look here at the Mighty Thor versus the Juggernaut, and take a look at the cover. It tells you exactly what we're getting in this story. Two big titans of the Marvel Universe colliding in this one. And this is drawn by Ron Frenz and Joe Sano. So it's that creative team. And I think Ron Frenz actually is doing part of the writing and plotting as well. So he's not just doing the artwork, but he's working with Tom DeFalco as far as doing the writing. And later on, Ron Frenz would do more of the writing and plotting when he did the later versions of Thor, where Thor was separated from Eric Masterson, and later on when we get to characters like Thunderstrike. So at this point, though, we're still with the classic version of Thor. He's still bonded with Eric Masterson, but we only see him for a brief moment in this book. So just a quick story about where I got this book. This is actually one of the few classic comic books that I have that I did not buy myself. My father bought this for me, and he bought it at a time where I had the flu. I was bedridden for like 2 or 3 days, and I remember him buying me some comic books to read while I was in bed, and this was one of the ones he got me, and this was my favorite one out of that batch. So let's flip it open and break it open, and we get a chance to see a big splash page of the Juggernaut right there in your face, close quarters, close up, and him saying, "This world is mine." So let me just give you a quick little backstory about what's going on before this, because they focus more on the action and the fight between Thor and the Juggernaut in this book. So there is not a lot of lead-in that they show you, and they really don't even give you any backstory. So you would have to have the last issue to know what happened. But the mutant team known as Excalibur was on the hunt for the Juggernaut, and they had come into contact with Thor, who had fought the Juggernaut very recently and sent the Juggernaut into outer space. So when Thor did that, the Juggernaut actually landed on this alien world, and he wound up taking over. So in a way, Thor was trying to get rid of the Juggernaut. He knew he couldn't really kill him because of the way the Juggernaut is protected by his magic and his armor. So he banished him into outer space. And in doing so, the Juggernaut landed on this alien world and has taken over. And so when they actually track the Juggernaut here, they find he is the master of this alien world. And that's what we're getting right here, you know, just the backstory or the exposition where the Juggernaut is letting them know how he got there. And right now, you know, he was letting them know that this world was under the control of like some sort of tyrant, but the Juggernaut beat him and took over, basically. And, you know, showcasing how strong he is, but also letting him know that now that Excalibur and Thor are his prisoners, he's in control, and he's going to make sure that they stay rot in prison. And, you know, you get to see just how strong the Juggernaut is when he swings his fist and knocks over this rock here. Like, there's a lot of that in this book where Juggernaut, just when he's talking, he causes a lot of destruction. You're going to see that in this book. So we get a little bit of the story here where Thor and Excalibur are being taken away to their prison. And while they're being taken away, the people who were formerly in control of this planet, led by a prince named Zalask, the rebels, they come back to try to fight and take their world back, and they wound up freeing. On the next page here, we see some of the secondary story of this issue. There's not much of it, but there is a little bit of it because it leads into some of the story in the issue following this one where Thor and Ghost Rider actually team up. But we have the Wrecking Crew, and they're actually looking for their partner Bulldozer. So their partner Bulldozer was captured by this police squad called Cold Blue, and the Wrecking Crew wants to get their partner back. And, you know, two of the characters are having a little bit of a disagreement, and the Wrecker is pretty much just getting them back in order. And I always enjoyed the Wrecking Crew. They're probably one of my favorite groups of villains from the Marvel Universe. They're basically thugs with magical powers. So they're not, you know, they're not your typical characters that plan out things, or they're not really the brains of any type of operation, but they are extremely powerful, okay, because they have access to Asgardian magic. And once again, they're basically thugs and criminals, so they have no problem doing harm to lots of people. They beat up some big name characters in the Marvel Universe, you know, The Thing, Hercules, and others. You know, they've even put some characters in the hospital, so they have no problem in wreaking havoc on any superhero in the Marvel Universe. But they're on the hunt now for their partner Bulldozer, who has been locked up. And we see him here in his cell, like they took off his armor that he wore, and they got him locked up in there. And once again, this is a group called Code Blue. They are basically like a SWAT team that specializes in fighting like supervillains. And they were introduced in the Mighty Thor. And I always like the addition of these types of characters. I think they actually work pretty well as like supporting cast members in the Thor stories, because they don't have any magic themselves, but they have special gear and science and technology, and they all specialize in certain things. I think they even had their own comic for a while, but it never lasted very long. And we even get a chance to see Ghost Rider driving through some pedestrians here, because they're going to have he's going to show up a lot later when they deal with the Wrecking Crew. So as we get back to the alien planet where the Juggernaut is in control, and here is Prince Zalaski, and he is the one that was overthrown by the Juggernaut, and he's basically making a deal here with Thor and the others, saying that if you help me get rid of the Juggernaut, you know, I'm the rightful ruler. I'll take my place back as the prince of this planet. Now, while the heroes have a little bit of problem with that, because this Prince Zelazny seems like he's just as bad, if not worse, than the Juggernaut. But, you know, Thor still feels partially responsible, saying that, you know, I'm the one that threw Juggernaut into space. He shouldn't be here by all rights. You know, whatever issues this planet is having, the Juggernaut should not be one of them. So I'm going to volunteer to help. You know, I'll help get rid of Juggernaut, and he'll release the members here of Excalibur in exchange. So Thor decides to ride off, and he's going to fly to the castle to fight the Juggernaut. And the Juggernaut is being told by one of his new guards, basically, that Thor is heading towards him. And the Juggernaut not only breaks his cup, his pimp cup there, but he smacks all the taste out of the mouth of his guard and says, you know, tell the chef to go make me something to eat, because I'm going to work up an appetite fighting Thor here. Now, I don't know how this guy is supposed to do that, because it seems like the Juggernaut smacked him into unconsciousness. But, you know, once again, it shows just how much destruction the Juggernaut causes just when he gives orders for something. So I don't know why he thinks he's a more benevolent leader than the one that was overthrown. So now we get here to one of my favorite action pages in this book, the start of the battle, where we have Thor breaking in to the wall here and getting ready to face the Juggernaut. And you see that the Juggernaut is getting his helmet put on by his guards. And, you know, they're kind of having a conversation there where the Juggernaut says, you know, is this going to be, am I just going to have to fight you and beat you into unconsciousness, or is this a fight to the death? And we get a chance to see the two foes facing with their eyes looking very, very harshly at one another. And once again, I'm a sucker for things like this kind of like preparation before a battle, and seeing these two close-ups here of the characters' faces, and you can see how determined they both are to put an end to the other. So not wasting any time, the battle starts. Juggernaut smashes his fist down into the ground, shakes Thor up, and the Juggernaut obviously is bigger. He's actually a lot stronger than Thor because of just the magic that is imbued inside of him. But Thor is a warrior, and he basically lets him know, you know, I've been fighting and doing this stuff for centuries. I'm a god, for God's sakes, you know. I'm not someone to play with. So he's showing the Juggernaut, he's like, you may be strong, but I know how to fight. And so Thor moves out of the way of this Juggernaut haymaker and smashes his hammer right down on his head. Now, had the Juggernaut been just a regular person or even a superpowered criminal at this point, he would have lost right here, because Thor bringing down his mallet right on top of his head like this would have ended the fight. But we all know that the Juggernaut is imbued with magical power. That's where his power comes from. It comes from magic, and that's going to play into this battle, by the way. And he lets Thor know, look, I have an impregnable force field around me. That's what makes me the Juggernaut. That's why I can withstand any type of pain, pressure, or any other type of power or whatever, because that's my force field protects me. So as those two are duking it out, the members of Excalibur figure out a way to escape without having to go along with the plans of this Prince Zelazny. And it is Shadowcat, and we all know her mutant power is to be able to phase through things. So she phased through her cell, and she grabs her friends and helps Captain Britain and McGann out of their cell. And they decide that they're not going to let Thor be used as a guinea pig to help this despot get his planet back. So they decide to fight off the guards themselves. And you see Captain Britain giving a big haymaker to this guard right here and knocking him all the way out of the screen. Back to the action. The Juggernaut has rammed Thor into the wall. And what I like about this battle is these guys are actually going to start, you know, losing like parts of their clothing. Like you see right here, Thor's helmet comes off. And what I like about this is with the illustrations done by both Ron Friends and Joe Sano, there's a continuity to it. So you can see this is where Thor loses his helmet. So from here on out, he doesn't have his helmet anymore. He's fighting without it. So you always have to remember things like that. When you set up a fight scene and there's continuity, like if your character loses part of their clothing, or maybe, you know, if you read some crazy mangas that I do, maybe a character loses a limb, you always want to keep that continuity going and make sure that that maintains throughout the rest of the fight. And remember what happened where. So that way you can keep the story going and still be consistent throughout the fight. So once again, Juggernaut is throwing a punch. Thor uses the force from his hammer to shoot at the Juggernaut, but it's still not getting through the force field. So Thor thinks, you know what, I'm going to have to do something very drastic. And he throws his hammer at the Juggernaut, but it doesn't hit the Juggernaut. It actually goes past him and goes outside the fortress window. Excuse me. It goes outside the window and creates a field of energy around the castle that these two are fighting in. So the Juggernaut doesn't see what the point of this is. He doesn't care. He still feels strong. He tries to grab Thor by the face. And right then and there, that's when Thor hits him with a haymaker and busts the Juggernaut's helmet wide open. And so what we find out here is the reason Thor threw his hammer out there was, since they're on an alien planet, Thor threw out his hammer, and now the energy field that he created is blocking all of the magic that helps the Juggernaut. It's blocking his force field, so he doesn't have it anymore. And now he basically has to fight Thor head up. And Juggernaut doesn't seem to be worried about it. It's like, you know what? I might not be invulnerable anymore, but I'm still just as strong as you are, and I can fight you just as good. So he jumps at Thor and says, I'm the Juggernaut. I can't be beat, and we're going to fight this man to man. Great illustration of this punch here. I love this. Seeing the Juggernaut get punched in the face and seeing his helmet bust open. Once again, keep that continuity of this fight going on here. So the Juggernaut no longer has his helmet anymore, and Thor no longer has his helmet. They're fighting without it, just mano a mano. And you see this right here, how the Juggernaut drops a big haymaker down on Thor's head. And Thor is laying down and almost is about to get beat up even more. And he winds up moving out of the way of this one punch, but it still gets part of his cape. So now his cape is ripped off. So Thor has lost his helmet and his cape, but he's still in the fight. And he still winds up hitting the Juggernaut. So think about what's going on here. Think of how this fight has evolved. These guys, they started out fighting with both of their powers. They both started out fighting with their normal weapons. The Juggernaut with his invulnerability, the Juggernaut with his helmet, and the Juggernaut with all of his strength, and Thor had his hammer. But now they've both lost all of that. And now it's just the straight up fist. You know, that's all they got right now. It's just a straight up shooting a fade between one another. Fist for fist, and see who's going to be standing at the end of it. And I love stuff like that. I love gimmicks like that. You'll rarely see that in comic books nowadays, where it gets that dirty and that raw in a superhero fight or a brawl. And we continue over here with the fight, and you see Thor is actually giving the Juggernaut that work. And, you know, punching him in the face, hitting him in the gut. And Juggernaut's actually dizzy right here. We don't, you know, this is going to be tough right now, because and Thor is thinking, he's like, you know what? I got to give it to the Juggernaut. He's actually a good opponent. So Thor actually respects him as an opponent, as a real tough guy. The fact that he even stood up to Thor this long. But you know what? He's like, I got to still put an end to him, though, because he's too evil to let live. And Thor was going to kill him, basically, by punching him and taking him out. But as soon as he does that, the force field comes back. So the thing is, Thor can only be away from his hammer for a certain amount of time. So when he created that force field with the hammer, it was eventually going to have to come back. And it winds up coming back to his hand. So now the Juggernaut has his force field back. Now, the crazy part is the Juggernaut sees this and is like, you know what? Thor has all his power is based on his hammer. I'm going to get that hammer. And we all know this is kind of a plot device that a lot of villains have tried, where they thought that the best way to beat Thor is to get his hammer away from him. And we're going to see how that goes right when we come back from this part of the story. The Wrecking Crew have now found their buddy, Bulldozer, who's being transported to a Supermax prison. And they wound up attacking the transport truck. The truck winds up going into like a graveyard area. And of course, that's where the Ghost Rider is. And Dan Ketch witnesses the explosion. He runs over, grabs the amulet on his bike, catches on fire, and becomes the Ghost Rider. And rides on in there to stop the Wrecking Crew from helping their buddy escape. So, back to the action. We got the Juggernaut has grabbed up a big stone column and has decided to hit Thor with it. And in doing so, he's knocked the hammer out of Thor's hand. And he thinks that, you know what, I'm just as strong as Thor is. Let me go get this hammer and bust his head open with it. But he can't do it, because we know that that hammer is enchanted with magic, and only those who are worthy can lift this hammer. So with all his strength, even the Juggernaut can't lift it. And Thor lets him know, he's like, thy failure is caused by thy weakness of character, not by thy limbs. Basically telling them, like, you know what? It doesn't matter how strong you are, you're still not worthy enough to lift Mjolnir. And so the Juggernaut says, you know what? I don't care about any of that. The Juggernaut is basically ignorant in any sense of the word, but he is strong. And he decides he's still going to fight Thor. And Thor starts whipping his hammer around. And the Juggernaut's letting him know, he's like, you know what? That doesn't matter either. You can cause a storm or whatever. That's still not going to stop me. But Thor has other plans. As the Juggernaut tries to punch him, Thor uses the leather strap that is on his hammer and wraps it around the Juggernaut's hand and flings Mjolnir into space once again. And by doing so, the Juggernaut is actually trapped by Mjolnir and can't get out. And he winds up throwing the Juggernaut out into an asteroid field, basically out in deep space. So as Thor is sitting there waiting for his hammer to come back, because he's without it for a certain amount of time, he reverts back to Eric Masterson. And Eric Masterson uses his smarts and giving a little speech there, basically telling the people of this world, don't let the fact that Juggernaut is gone make you feel that you have to go back to being ruled by this other tyrant. You know, you guys have a choice now. You can free yourselves, and you don't have to go back to being ruled by these tyrants. You can actually have freedom on your own planet. So once Eric Masterson reaches his hand out, Mjolnir comes back and he transforms back into Thor. And we see that the group Excalibur has captured the tyrant that was holding the planet hostage before the Juggernaut got there. And it seems like these people are now going to have a better life because Thor and Excalibur helped them out. They got rid of 2 tyrants in one. And you see the Juggernaut out here basically floating away on an asteroid and, you know, saying that, you know, I'm still the Juggernaut and nothing can stop me. So he's pissed off that he's stuck out there, and he wants to basically find a way back to Earth so he can confront Thor again at some other point. So back to the action on Earth. Ghost Rider is fighting the Wrecking Crew, and, you know, he's wrecking shop on them pretty good right now. Even when Piledriver punches him in the back, the Ghost Rider is able to turn around and wrap his chain around Piledriver's neck and sling him into the rest of the Wrecking Crew. So when the Wrecker uses his enchanted crowbar to shoot at the Ghost Rider, it actually, the way that his magic hits the Ghost Rider's magic causes Mephisto to show up. So the fact that these two types of enchanted magic hit each other like this, it actually alerts Mephisto, and he actually winds up coming to the surface world. we're going to see more on that in the next issue. So when Ghost Rider and Thor team up, that's when you see that more of that story come up later. And it even alerts another person who's well versed in magic, and that's Loki. Loki is alerted by these two magics colliding together, and he thinks that, you know what, it's time to enact my new plan as well. So Loki has a plan that does come up later on in the issues following this one. And if you're interested, I can review that comic book as well, because that leads into a really great story, a great confrontation between Loki and Thor. So as Eric Masterson returns home from the alien planet, he gets home and sees his assistant Susan and one of his friends from work. And they say that they have discovered Eric's secret. They know why he's always missing work or just disappearing. They have discovered his real secret, and they know what's really been going on with him. And I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it and let you guys know what they discovered. They don't know that he's Thor, okay? What they actually think is the reason he disappears and doesn't show up for work is that he's actually an alcoholic. So they think that explains all of Eric's problems, and that's why he lost custody of his son, is because Eric is an alcoholic, and that's where he disappears to. He goes to drink somewhere. They don't know that he's Thor. So that's what they're assuming, is that he must be an alcoholic. Because, I mean, rationally, that's what most people would think is up with their friend when he disappears or doesn't show up for work or whatever. They wouldn't realize that their friend is actually bonded to a god from Asgard and is really a superhero. So that is it for the Mighty Thor 429. Once again, one of my favorite comic books from this era. I love this comic book. I just love the fight between Thor and the Juggernaut in here. Is one of the best fights from this era, as far as a hero and a villain fighting against each other. I think the Thor and Juggernaut are actually two really good adversaries because both their powers are based on magic and enchantments. So it's cool to see two super strong characters who have magic on their side fight each other like this. And, you know, the Ghost Rider story, I guess it was okay as far as like them adding this into the story. It fits more into what comes next in the next issues, especially with regards to the Wrecking Crew and Loki and whatnot. But, you know, it's a small part of the story, and I'm glad the main focus was on Thor fighting the Juggernaut. This was requested by the fans, and the editors listened and wanted to give people more of it because the Thor and Juggernaut have fought before, and, you know, they wanted to give their fan base something to read. That's rare nowadays. It's rare that the comic book industry actually gives the fans what they want. Usually it's just these weirdo writers doing what they want to do and creating their own fan fiction in a lot of these books nowadays. But back then, they actually listened to their fans and allowed their fans to dictate how certain stories would go. And once again, an amazing story, amazing action in this book. If you have this book in your collection, let me know. I know there are some people out there who do have it because I showed it on my Facebook one day and some people said they did have it. So, I mean, it's a great book. And once again, you don't get fights like this in comic books much anymore. Like, if you do, there's so much lead up to it, and the fight is always disappointing. But the fact that they got right to the nitty gritty, they didn't waste a lot of time. They got right to the fight between the two. It's a great fight. It gets, you know, raw and rugged. As time goes on, you can even see a lot of like scratches on Thor's face. He loses his helmet, his cape, and everything. The Juggernaut gets his helmet busted. And like I said, they just get raw, gritty, and dirty with the fight, where it's just fisticuffs by the end. They started out fighting with their magic and their powers, and then they just resort to straight up brute strength and boxing. I like stuff like that. I like when characters go to that degree by the end of a fight. It works great. Works great in this comic. So let me know what you guys think of it. If you enjoyed seeing me review this book, go ahead and hit the like button. Go ahead and share this with some folks out there that you know enjoy retro comic books and reviews. And make sure you go ahead and subscribe to this channel so that you're here the next time that I review another comic book on Chris Crazy House Presents Comics Crazy. Anyway, folks, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.